Atlantis against MU. Today I set out to uncover a fairly simple idea. Are IMU and MU two different beings? And that seemingly simple question turned into me somehow unraveling the true name of the ancient kingdom, the first world, and really admittedly digging a little bit too deep into just two letters, M and U. And just as a little bit of context here, the reason I even decided to go deep down this rabbit hole is because I've noticed a lot of comments on the videos recently asking why I specifically am calling IMU both IMU and MU sometimes. And to be just completely honest with you, I really haven't thought about it that much, like not that deeply, because as far as I was always concerned before chapter 1179 at least, IMU called themselves MU, and so I could use them interchangeably just to, keep the videos a little bit less repetitive, I guess. For me it was basically people call IMU IMU, IMU calls IMU MU, that's that. But then it really hit me. The questions in the comments really shouldn't have been why do I, Manu, call IMU MU, but why does IMU call IMU MU? Ooh, Jesus, tongue twister, I swear. Which led me to arguably the most uncomfortable truth in One Piece right now. We don't actually really still know who or maybe even what IMU actually is. We've now seen Devil IMU, yes, but the story we're given about them doesn't really line up at all with what we've been told about them so far. This IMU here has a name that Oda gives them, Norona IMU. They are supposed to be one of the original 20 kings who founded the world government, who fought against the ancient kingdom, that we'll get to in just a moment. We've been knowing about that for quite a while now, a figure so far above the system that even the Gorosei, who we thought run everything, bow like little babies. Do little babies bow? Well, I don't know. They do to me. The Gorosei call this person Imu-sama, Zebek calls them the world, but then IMU does something a little bit weird. They call themselves MU in third person. And here's the detail that really makes this all so interesting to me and what my team and I set out to discover today with you in this video. No one else does that in the story. Not the Gorosei, not the Celestial Dragons, not Zebek, only explicitly IMU. So the first big question I want to answer with you today before we get into more crazy stuff is, what is MU? Is it a title, an abbreviation, a forgotten name, or is it something else entirely? Well, for starters, MU is this kanji right here, which means void in Japanese, and I'm kind of starting to think it might be a little deeper than just that even, but still an interesting fun fact. Now, just to lay it out for you before going into all the evidence, my personal guess here is that MU is in fact not IMU, and IMU is not MU. I think that the IMU wants to be MU, and IMU is actually Timumu. Does that make sense to you? No? Well, that's okay, because it will in just a second. I think that when we take another look at the information we got in chapter 1179, the confirmation of IMU's devil fruit and their entire design specifically, I can kind of start to paint you a picture of where my head is here right now. I believe that IMU is actually exactly what Oda tells us with the text box. At their core, it's Saint Norona IMU, a human, founder of the world government alongside the other 19 kings and wielder of the power of the Akuma no Mi. Now, whether that means the devil fruit, the devil's fruit, or just devil fruits in general, we don't know yet because that's how Oda likes to keep it vague in Japanese. However, the devil, the one whose power IMU seems to be harnessing or using, I believe that that thing is the real MU. Whether this is like a possession thing going on with all the eyeballs and the really weird scary ring behind IMU, which definitely kind of gives off like venom or possessed evil being energy, or it may be that MU was turned into the devil fruit and IMU's channeling their will, since we pretty much know that devil fruits have their own will, it seems. Basically what I'm saying is, I think that the devil in One Piece is named MU, and at the very least that would kind of fit very nicely with the void definition as well. But I'll go one step further here because I think that we've actually seen the devil already depicted in chapter 1138's mural. No, it's not the giant IMU-shaped figure on the left here. I think that one is IMU using the devil fruit power. I believe that MU, or our hidden sneaky devil boy, is none other than this figure on the right, the Hell Flame Serpent. Oh, no, wait a moment. Before you click off the video or you go to the comments and say that I'm huffing mad reefer here and I'm delusional, I've got a reason for this, so please hear me out. You know, like, let me take you along for the ride here. The devil being the Hell Flame Serpent kind of adds with a ton of stuff that I've been talking about on the channel for literal months at this point. Plus, I know there are Reddit threads and some other creators also pushing at least like similar ideas for this. For example, Emu's weird abyssal powers are depicted as these black, inky flames. Like whenever these abyss markings appear somewhere, they're accompanied by this pitch black fire. You know what that sounds like to me? A hell flame, which we can match to the fires all over the mural as well. Now, of course, if you like Bible peas and you want to get all Abrahamic here, there is the Garden of Eden story. Eve is tempted to eat the forbidden fruit by what? By what? Oh yeah, a serpent representing the embodiment of the devil. A devil fruit provided by a serpent associated with hell. I don't know, sounds at least interesting to me, right? If only like there was a clear-cut connection between Emu, Eve, and gardens, but it's almost like their entire kingdom and empire is built on top of the Eve tree, and Emu spends all their time in the flower room, a literal small paradise garden within the literal Holy Land where the gods live. So, you know, hopefully you can at least see why I'm connecting the dots in this way. What this doesn't fully answer, of course, though, is how Emu got the devil's powers to begin with, why I think the serpent's name is Mu, and who is in charge in this little buddy cop situation. Who's controlling who here? I'm getting there. Be patient. Well, this video is going places, and it's not gonna be what you expect. All right, for now, I do think it's safe to say either that Emu is using Mu's power by force, similar to how the Harley text describes the Earth God from the First World using the Hellflame Serpent power, or Mu, our big devil snake, is using Emu as a vessel of sorts. And just to be clear here, I don't want to beat around the bush, I have a personal preferred option here, but in reality, I can kind of see either option working. Emu could be calling themselves Mu because they want to be Mu, like how Yamato calls himself Odin, or they could call themselves Mu because, well, it's just Mu talking through Emu's body, not Emu, who's just, you know, like acting as a vessel. Or somewhere in between, the will of Mu might be manifesting through the devil fruit, and that's why Emu is having a little bit of an identity crisis, you know, occasionally losing control to this other being that's inside of them. Something that I like as well, because it would be really cool if this is something that happens with Luffy, where at some point he uses his devil fruit to the point where like the Nika inside of his fruit actually awakens and takes over, which we can already see to a certain degree happening in Gear 5 anyways. But that's of course an idea for another video. What I actually want to shift into now is how I come to the conclusion that Mu is the name of the devil and what that means for the rest of the world at large. Because I do think that Mu, being the secret Satan name, actually could give us a pretty decent answer to a big question that's been plaguing me forever, which is, what is the name of the ancient kingdom that Clover was shot for almost uttering? And also, how did all of that fun first and second world stuff actually go down? Atlantis and Mu. Allow me to now take you back to the One Piece community around, I don't know, like May of 2024 roughly, when we first witnessed the Mother Flame in its little Mother Flame tank. Notice that right here, written across the top, are the conspicuous letters A and Mu, the smoking gun, or the smoking flame that's underwater. And why do I bring up this fact right now, besides that, you know, Mu is written here? Well, because as I was researching everything Mu related, I was reminded of an old theory I proposed that I know pops up every now and then across, you know, X, the Everything app, etc., which is the lost continent of Mu. Now, just to be completely honest with you, like alt history stuff and like ancient lost civilizations, like all that Graham Hancock stuff, like, I'm a big fan of it. I personally don't know if I actually believe in all of it or if I just find it amusing. It's probably, a mixture of both, and I don't know, it's entertainment for me at the very least. And as I love all that stuff, I was all about seeing Mu, a lost continent set to predate the lost city of Atlantis, on this Mother Flame tank. But all of this was of course discussed before chapter 1138, where it was revealed that there were 2 ages of One Piece before the current third one. Right now we tend to call these the first and the second world, but I do think I can finally see the threat that I was still missing very heavily back in 2024, because after years of theorizing, I feel like I might have finally figured out what A and Mu is actually referring to here. I believe that the lost civilization from the first world was Mu, and the one of the second world was Atlantis. The first world, ruled by the Earth God, and Mu, the Hellflame Serpent, was an advanced civilization, the first civilization of mankind on the blue One Piece planet, and here is why I think that. In case you don't know, which there's a pretty good chance that you've never heard about this, Mu is another supposed mythological ancient lost continent presumed to be located in the Pacific Ocean, predating the civilization of Atlantis, which at least for a long time was generally assumed to be somewhere within the Atlantic Ocean, because of the name. The idea of the civilization of Mu was popularized by James Churchward in a series of stories, and they are my personal biggest piece of evidence because they happen to line up super well with Oda's main lore for One Piece, at least of what we know of so far. So, in a nutshell, Mu is said to be this lost, ancient, super technologically advanced civilization that is very commonly actually associated with the original Garden of Eden where humanity was born. It was supposedly ruled by dark-skinned, powerful people with crazy advanced futuristic technologies, but the way that it vanished is actually what sticks out the most here. I quote, "Mu was completely obliterated in almost a single night after a series of earthquakes and volcanic eruptions. The broken land fell into that great abyss of fire and was covered by 50 millions of square miles of water. And this occurred after the land of Mu was supposedly visited by the wrath of Human, that lord of volcanic fires, to whom fury it afterward fell a victim to." Huh, really? The great abyss of fire consumed Mu? Doesn't this kind of sound like, I don't know, okay, I should stop with the voice, but it does kind of sound like the Harley text describing the destruction of the first world. Consumed by fire and darkness, the abyss ties to the Garden of Eden and advanced technology. Like, bro, this is everything we've been talking about for weeks now. The Hellflame Serpent, Devil, Eden connection, advanced tech showcased literally on the right side of the mural, the way it was destroyed. Mu feels like the first world of One Piece to me, or at least the civilization that was there during the first world periods. Especially the part where mankind came and caused the destruction of the continent. That's the whole man was consumed by greed. Also, it kind of completes a set of duos finally, because Mu and Nika are in the first world, Emu and Joy Boy in the second world, and presumably, don't quote me on this yet, Blackbeard and Luffy in the third. I also want to quickly point out that Emu has some crazy eldritch horror vibes to me personally, and to no surprise, Mu is used in a ton of H.P. Lovecraft's Cthulhu mythos as well, describing ancient underwater civilizations, cosmic horror gods from the great beyond, etc, etc. Even that part of Emu and Mu is covered by this ancient civilization. And I must admit, and I do want to say that I'm not a huge fan of it, this description of Mu as a civilization ruled by dark-skinned figures, does line up, of course, with a depiction of the Lunarians and their attachment to fire and dark Lucifer-like style wings, right? I will say I think it's personally a little bit rocky territory by Oda here, since there is some odd cultural and racial implications of things, but he's Japanese, I'm German, so who am I to comment on this? but I kind of wanted to point it out because it does add up with all the Mu stuff, and it would be dumb not to draw the parallel to the literal emo reveal we just got. And so here's my proposal for how Mu, the devil, and the first world all could click together in the context of the series. Mu, the ancient Hellflame serpent, was the original god of the planet, a giant serpent deity, and the land of Mu was named after it. Similar to how there are like multiple Wanos and Burkas in One Piece, right? There's old and new Wano across the eras, and a Burka on the moon, and a Burka up in the Sky Islands, or at least there was one. Eventually, the Earth God dominates the serpent and takes over the world, harvesting the Earth's core for some mysterious purpose, and the slaves of the civilization of Mu prayed, the sun god Nika mysteriously appears from the heavens above, and Mu is destroyed in battle, a victim of the Earth God's greed. Okay, so I think that sort of works, right? But what was all that stuff I said earlier about Atlantis? And even more so, what does that mean for the end of the series? Luffy and Mu, right? Totally with you, man, here. Let's get into Atlantis stuff now next, because I do think that will sort of give you the big ancient history context for this theory that explains Luffy's role in the endgame. Atlantis, very much like Mu, was a giant ancient civilization that was still super advanced. This one, of course, was supposedly on the other side of the world and was coined by Plato in his works Timaeus and Critias. That's where the idea of Atlantis comes from, if you didn't know. Plato. Now, Atlantis is described as a nation ruled by a coalition of different kings, spanning multiple islands/kingdoms, and importantly, in the context of the works themselves, Atlantis is used as an example of the antithesis of perfect. It was an inherently flawed nation despite its paradise description. Plato actually proposed that an ideal country is ruled by a philosopher king who knows the truth of the world itself, as opposed to a coalition of kings like Atlantis, ignorant to reality and also greedy. It's actually also proposed by Plato that the culture and design of Egypt were inspired by Atlantis. He actually got the information of Atlantis from his own predecessor, Solon, who actually traveled to Egypt to visit, the temples there and talk to the Egyptian priests who told him about Atlantis and that the world and like the Greek culture is like so much older than the Greeks themselves remember. In the kingdom of Atlantis, there was also a special material, orichalcum, that was used as a central part of its civilization, which interestingly enough is also discussed by Nero, the Roman emperor, who is also theorized to be where Saint Imu gets part of their name from, potentially. Just a little fun factoid to tie it all together nicely. Atlantis, as many of you probably already know, also was destroyed and sank to the bottom of the sea, but this time it was earthquakes and a giant flood that swept it below the sea. Amazing work, friends. We are caught up on our Atlantis stuff now, and hopefully you already put together the fact that Atlantis is literally just the ancient kingdom from the Void Century. Technologically advanced? Check. Spanned multiple islands? Seemingly check. Lines up with the idea that the Grand Line itself might have been the ancient kingdom, or at the very least, why multiple countries and islands throughout One Piece share fragments of the ancient kingdom like Elbaf, Wano, Alabasta, etc. Alabasta is also interesting here specifically because not only was it the first country where we learn about the poneglyphs and also the first country where we see the Joy Boy ancient kingdom symbol in the flag, it's also because Egypt is tied so heavily to Atlantis, as it was stated by Plato that Egypt's entire culture and system was inherited or inspired by Atlantis, but in some other versions of the tale, it was actually inspired by Mu. And as we know, Nefertari Lily was one of the original 20 kings of the world government that fought against and overthrew the ancient kingdom, and was the only one who then opted to stay on the ocean instead of going up the rat line. Also, Atlantis was destroyed by a giant flood and earthquakes. Boom shakalaka. That's the ancient kingdom for you. Flooded by Poseidon, who, mind you, ruled the main kingdom of Atlantis. There was supposedly a giant temple to Poseidon directly at the center of Atlantis. Speaking of which, I do think there's also an element here that I failed to properly address that sort of ties this in also perfectly. Blackbeard. Like, his desire for the Quake Fruit and his entire plans Zebek's goal of becoming king of the world like his ancestor Davy Jones? Well, it does make me kind of think that Davy Jones was a king of Atlantis. Maybe not the king, but a king of the coalition, overthrown, and potentially alongside Poseidon, sank the nation with his earthquake fruit. But most importantly, I do think we can start to see how Joy Boy and Nerona Emu fit into this equation also after establishing that Atlantis was the name of the ancient kingdom. Also, I'm not sure if you agree with this, but I personally feel really dumb because this is like the most Oda thing to ever do in all times after the reveal of Davy Jones specifically. Like, the ancient kingdom literally just being named Atlantis is just so perfect and fits into everything that Oda has given us about the ancient past. Like, I don't even know why this didn't come up in my brain earlier. And it would also explain the weird connection between A and Mu, because both advanced civilizations that probably needed the Forbidden Sun to power their countries, so the Mother Flame's tank could quite literally just have a message from Vegapunk to remind everyone of the two nations that already fell and were destroyed because of this creation. Something that, by the way, we know for a fact Vegapunk very much regrets, as he literally says that the Mother Flame is a mistake and way too dangerous. He admits that he flew too close to the sun, giving Emu the power that probably was at the center of a big Void Century war, and maybe even of the war that might have happened during the First World. But what's not quite clear to me yet is why Vegapunk is so wishy-washy about who was the bad guy during the Void Century, and I do think that my pieced together idea here will actually help give light to that question as well. Here's what I think could have happened. Atlantis was the nation that helped destroy Mu, its rival country/kingdom, a coalition of great kings who took the Forbidden Sun and bolstered their country in the wake of Mu's fall. Nika and the Hellflame Serpent destroyed Mu, it fell into the abyss, and Atlantis was free to thrive using the power of the Forbidden Sun. Davy Jones was a king, maybe even the king of Atlantis, and was maybe not the greatest guy. And so, even after starting off as the good guys maybe and doing some good stuff at the beginning, history starts repeating itself, corruption does its thing, and greed does its thing, and 20 kings of Atlantis rebelled against the main island, which for our purpose could be Laugh Tale, who knows. Among these 20 rebellious kings was Nerona Emu, who needed more power to overthrow the mighty Davy Jones so that he could win the heart of Nefertari Lily. She, however, was smitten by a very fun, charismatic little fellow who left Atlantis to become the first pirate, Joy Boy. He had realized that Atlantis, which was actually described by Plato as a seafaring empire, was not a perfect utopia as it seemed on the surface and was built on loss, murder, etc. So he actually set out to figure out how to take down his own king and uncovered the events what basically happened to Mu during the First Worlds. How the Hellflame Serpent was dominated and controlled, and the truths of the Eternal Flame. Meanwhile, realizing that he needed more power to defeat Davy Jones, Nerona Emu consumed the Devil's Fruit and used its devilish abyss powers to channel or control the power of Mu, the Hellflame Serpent, who was sunk into the flaming abyss of the planet's core. As a result, Emu dominated the will of Mu, the Hellflame Serpent, and the original country fell to Atlantis to usurp the throne instead, becoming the god of the new world, the new Mu. That's funny to say, the new Mu. Joy Boy teams up with a bunch of key figures. Maybe that's why Leloucia needed to go, because, they're famous for milk, and maybe Emu didn't like them saying Mu. They couldn't be the new Mu. The red line was the new Mu. Anyways, Joy Boy might have teamed up with a bunch of key figures, Poseidon, Elbaf, etc., to defeat New Mu, and fails, leaving behind a trail of stones, the poneglyphs, so that someone someday can eventually take down Mu, who on this is getting ridiculous, who on the outside is still just Nerona Emu, one of the 20 kings who rebelled against Atlantis, but only a secret few realize that they are the Great One, using the power of Mu, the devil, to dominate the world with their abyssal powers. The same way that you can dominate your knowledge of One Piece and my heart by joining the Ohara Patreon and gaining access to my covenants, extra content, early chapter reviews, and the insane art that my team creates for these videos, including all the cool thumbnails. Alright, back to the video. Now, did I get all of this right in this theory? And, we're gonna be years from now saying Manu called everything. Well, probably not, sadly. Surely there are some missing pieces or characters or like story parts, blobs that aren't in the spots that I think they're in, but I do really believe that the idea does stick very well. It kind of makes sense with all the context we have, and it even lines up with a ton of other stuff in One Piece and the lost continents, great floods, ancient technology, ancient civilization stuff, such as the concept of utopia, a place that Crocodile is trying to build that literally is the point of the entire Alabasta saga. But in the real world, the first time utopia is popularized is in Utopia by Thomas More, which was based on, you'll never guess it, Plato's Atlantis tale. Crocodile searching for the poneglyph and the true history of the world to create his utopia lines up with this very perfectly, since it would mean that in One Piece, Crocodile is looking at the Ancient Kingdom as an example of a utopia, which is kind of ironic again because, as Vegapunk seems to realize, the Ancient Kingdom also was very much flawed and not a perfect utopia, which is the entire reason that Atlantis was even referenced by Plato, as it was designed to show his idea of a great republic, and Athens was perfect, or at least, what he thought would make Athens great, and by contrast, showing the story of a previously assumed perfect utopia that was crazily technologically advanced and had everything they wanted, but, kind of was consumed by its own greed and hubris. Psst, also kind of crazy how it's like relevant to everything that's going on in the world right now. Like, I gotta say, my enjoyment of One Piece, which has always been beyond the stars, but it's a story, it's like, I talk about it as a job, so, there's like ups and downs. I gotta say, One Piece, like, as a work of literature, it's never been greater than right now, where somehow Oda has been, like, calling everything that's going on in the real world, and it's just like, but basically, you can use One Piece to just be like, yeah, don't do what we're doing right now in the world. Like, we'll mess things up. That's, like, basically Oda's big message, I personally think. Kind of crazy. It becomes more relevant and more relatable by the day. And actually, another key tie here is how one discovers these things in both the real world and One Piece. In all of the original Mu material by James Churchward, he stated that he learned of all this from ancient stone tablets that recounted the true, lost, forgotten history of the world. Now, to be fair, he's probably full of it, as much as I would love this to be real, but at the same time, it also lines up pretty perfectly one-to-one with the poneglyphs, ancient stone artifacts that are inscribed with the true history of the world. But to bring it all back to Mu, well, it would perfectly explain the structure of the Ancient Kingdom, the 20 kings of the world government, the First World, and why they call themselves Mu. Imu versus Luffy. The battle to free the devil. There are conflicting ideologies. The Ancient Kingdom tied to Joy Boy and Nerona Imu's world government. The world government, I feel like, kind of represents Plato's idea from the Republic, a government ruled by a leader who knows the real truths of the world. Imu, being Mu, can be described as that for sure, I think, whereas the Ancient Kingdom that Joy Boy probably was born in or a part of, which I think was ruled by Davy D. Jones, they would represent Atlantis, a coalition of kings allied together, led by a main king, built on trust and inherent power imbalance framed by equals who really aren't truly equals. Atlantis may be the home of devil fruits altogether, born from the dreams of its people, and Imu may have just literally created a devil fruit in the image of the ancient Mu. I guess there's also the angle where devil fruits have souls, right? We talked about that before, and Mu's inside the original Akuma no Mi, or, as I prefer it, somehow found Mu and is now controlling the Hellflame Serpent, like the First World's Earth God did as well. That would be why they call themselves Mu, because in their mind, They are Mu, the one true god, the philosopher king who knows the truth of the entire world by killing anyone else who knew about it too. That would explain why they keep destroying history, because they don't want anyone else to understand the truth of the world, the truth of Mu, so that they can maintain their monopoly and their role as the ruler of the world from within the shadows. That would explain why a great purge is coming in the main timeline, because Luffy, Vivi, Robin, etc., they're all way too close to learning the truth, and there are quite a few people who seem to know a good chunk of it anyways. That's why Joy Boy had to be slain. Not only because of the clear I wanna bang Lily stuff that Emo's given off, but because Joy Boy threatened their ability to rule and their monopoly on knowledge. If he's anything like Luffy, which he seems to be, Homeboy was befriending animals and people left and right. He's infectious in his positivity and friendship. Zunisha, Emmet, Lily, Poseidon, anyone and anything that Joy Boy met, he could somehow rally to his side. He would be just too dangerous if he met Mu, the Hellflame Serpent, because if there was anyone who would directly mess up Emo's plan to rule, it's the rubbery guy who befriends all the animals, especially if he has the powers of the Sun God Nika, who may have tried to free Mu during the First World anyways, and was defeated by the Earth Gods. Which has been a lot of chaotic and excited ramble that now brings me to Luffy and his role in the modern current era. I think that Luffy obviously needs to fulfill Joy Boy's will, but I don't think that he needs to learn that, because at his core, he's kind of like the same guy, just like Loki. They befriend animals. It's kind of the core thing at the center of Luffy's story. Anywhere he goes, everywhere he goes, he befriends all the animals. That's kind of the type of person he is. His key goal is freeing the oppressed because he just wants freedom. Well, I guess it's not even his goal. He just kind of frees the oppressed because it feels right to him. It's not even his goal, I guess. Like, if you feed him, he frees you. That's kind of Luffy 101. So just imagine what would happen if Luffy learns, of all people, that Emo is actually using the powers of an oppressed demon snake the size of a dang planet. Maybe, I don't know, size pending. But no, just seriously, like, think about it. If Emo is using the power of the devil, the Hellflame Serpent, then Luffy wouldn't even bat an eye to free that thing right away. You know he would. I think it just makes perfect sense with his character. Luffy doesn't need to know everything about Atlantis, Mu, politics, any of that. He would probably just want to free and befriend the big snake, kind of like he did on Skypiea actually, and that would probably mess up so much stuff, but it doesn't matter because Luffy isn't a hero and everyone else will pick up the pieces for him. I mean, that's literally how every single One Piece arc goes. He just frees some people and trusts that the right people will figure out the rest for him, and I don't think that'll be any different for the big final payoff of the series. And I'm not saying it's gonna be easy, because he still needs a way to even defeat Emu, and of course also people to defeat the Immortal Holy Knights, Emu's elite commanders. Luckily though, I do think that Luffy is pretty good at rallying people to his side, as we just said, and I do think he's already got his 13 commanders ready to defeat Emu's top 13 Holy Knights. And if you want to know who they might be and what, you know, matchups might be at the end of the story, you can check this video right here. Otherwise, thanks for watching. Thanks to our wonderful Patreons again, if you want to check that out. Much, much appreciated. I really can't express enough how much you guys mean to me every single week, and it's the truth. And I will see you hopefully in the next video. Hope this was a fun one.